Which council's wishes?
We're good to go. I'll make the motion that council accept the
just 1 second, sir. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes, please.
Sorry. I'll make the motion that council accept the financial statement presentation by MNP LLP representatives as information.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. There are further motions on page 191?
I'll move that council approve the audited financial statement for the year ended December 31st, 2021.
Questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
I'll move that council accept the 2021 audited findings report dated December 31st, 2021 as information.
Questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
Move that council authorize the Reeve Deputy Reeve and Chief Administration Officer to sign the approved December 31, 2021 financial statements as presented.
Questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation. We can move to 3.2. My report was included in the package. I will flag one thing from the Community Futures board meeting. You'll recall the RRF funding that Community Futures facilitated for businesses through COVID. There was a change to extend the deadline for repayment, which is a good thing. But then the time frame for the monthly payments was not concurrently extended. And so what we've noted is that when that comes into play, there will be an increased monthly repayment amount for recipients of those loans as they repay them if they don't pay them all up front and get that loan relief. This could cause hardship on many, many businesses throughout this region, well, throughout Canada, but also throughout this region. So just something for council to be mindful of. If you have an opportunity to advocate to anybody in the federal government, it would just be a good thing to bring to your attention. The CF board did write a letter to several key cabinet ministers and to MP Shields as our representative. So we are advocating, but if council wants to join us in that as well. And there are some good programs coming out of Community Futures, and I know the county's been amplifying some of those programs on our social media. I heard a radio spot with our executive director this morning on my way here. So just if you guys can sort of share with ratepayers, if people are looking to either start businesses or expand their businesses, there is both funding available, but also business support as well. So even if they don't require a loan, there is still coaching that's available. I finally was able to attend both the Keep Alberta RCMP Community Engagement Tour as well as the Provincial Information Session or Engagement Session on the Alberta Provincial Police Transition Study. Councilor Laprise included the slide deck from the presentation from the province. A lot of it was just sort of highlighting information that was in those reports. At both sessions, there were still a significant number of questions that I don't think necessarily have been fleshed out with the level of detail that people sort of were requesting. And then in our correspondence, we do have a letter pertaining to the union initiative as well. We can address that then. RMA Spring Convention was well attended. There was excellent sessions, really good debate on the resolutions that were brought forward, and good diversity in those resolutions. The ministerial forums were excellent as well. There was some good questions and good discussion in those. We did have an opportunity to meet with Minister Sawhney, with the Minister of Transportation and some of her department staff as well, and we're able to bring those 3 priority areas. We did actually get into the secondary highway discussion a little bit as well. Time did permit for that. And we did have another good meeting with Minister McIver of Municipal Affairs as well, again following up on the CMRB. I was asked to represent the county at the Strathmore Overnight Shelter March, and they are still accepting donations for the shelter, and I will just challenge all of us here to consider supporting the shelter if you're able to. They are doing really good work in Strathmore and serving a vulnerable population there. We had a good regional meeting with MP Shields, mayors and reeves from the region, and there was a couple of MLAs there as well. Good to hear the sort of challenges that are being experienced across the region, and also the advocacy that MP Shields has been doing for us in Ottawa. And then probably the highlight of my report, the March 28th meeting. As Council's well aware, Minister Rick McIver from Municipal Affairs met with Calgary Metropolitan Region Board. He did outline changes that had been requested from the rural members and what he was contemplating with that. There's an engagement period available for those members, and he did announce that the membership had been changed, and obviously the county and the town of Strathmore have been removed from the CMRB. So that was excellent news, and I was very grateful to hear that. I was also grateful to administration for leading our strategic planning session on the 29th. I think it was great that we could do that in-house with our administration. And I think we had some really good discussions, and I'm excited to see what will come from that session. With that, I will move my report be accepted as presented. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. All in favor? Motion is carried. I do see Dr. McNeely is here. Would you like us to wait until 11, or would you rather? Okay. Does administration mind if we move to our 11 o'clock appointment?
The only thing would be is if there's any callers that intended on calling in to listen. So
oh, sure. Okay, we'll maybe wait till 11. Yeah. Good point. Thank you. We'll move to Deputy Reeve Clausen's report.
Thank you. My report's on page 109. Added to it on 110, I believe. There's just a government member briefing update from SAWA. That's something we worked out at the board so we can get some information out. We got a lot of new councils out there that we wanted to make sure everybody knows that how much work has been done. The 2020-22 priorities, the $143,000, we did get the grant, and that lets us move forward with the EOI. We haven't met as an executive yet to figure out when that will go forward, but we definitely are have the money to do it, and it will take another step forward. So that's basically it. Lots of information there. It's been vetted and everything, so it's good to share with anybody out there. And I know we've reached out to our and do have an appointment, I believe, to have a presentation done at RMA as well, so that'll help. And if there is no questions, I will move my report as presented.
I just have one question on your SAWA note that Olds has decided to leave. So what does it cost? Like, just what's the annual fee to belong to SAWA?
I don't record this as factual, but I believe it was $6,000. And Olds was a initial supporter for a long time, and I do believe it was council changing. Right? There's been a lot of questions being asked with a bunch of new councillors on. So, you know, same as what we do. We're just
right now. Understood. So if Olds leaves, this plant gets up and running, produced, and it performs at the ideal. Is there a penalty for them to come back into this? Like, what was like? I just, you know, I understand the financial deal on. Well, we can say $6,000, but there should be a, you know, carrot and a stick, in my opinion, on. And I don't know if you've looked at that or not.
I believe the intention of the board was the ones that have stuck with it from the will be treated. basically like founding members, and the project will move forward and the funding will look that way. Anybody that comes in after a step back and step back in will be treated as a new customer. If that makes sense?
Yep.
How those numbers look, I have no idea. That hasn't been discussed or anything like that. But there's also, this project is based on mostly residential waste. There has been some, well, definitely there's going to be probably 50% of it will be commercial. So, and me being tasked with the transportation study, looking at how to make it as cost effective as possible. How to, you know, is there collection hubs? Is there all kinds of different ways to provide that service, and or does each municipality have to foot the bill, that kind of thing? Because that'll be the next question, is how much does it cost, right? So.
Okay, thank you.
Just building on what Councilor Eichert said, it might actually be a good thing for your board to finalize and just share with municipalities, just so that the members, like, it would help us justify our membership if we know what the potential implications would be, like if we were to remove ourselves and then want to rejoin. And not asking you today, but just if you want to take that back to the board for consideration. Obviously up to the board, but it might help mitigate membership changes if the members are aware of what the benefits of staying involved in the project are.
Yes, absolutely. I can bring that forward. There may be some document that I'm not aware of that's already been circulated, but we can address it at the board and kind of set out that guideline, I guess.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Deputy Reeve Clausen? You moved your report. All in favor? Motion is carried. Perhaps just a motion to accept your addendum as information as well.
So moved.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We'll move to Division 1. Councillor Brees.
Okay. So I guess I'd just like to highlight Strathmore Wheatland Chamber of Commerce. Can't remember if I've mentioned this in council already or not, but so they have, and I have to say, I believe they have signed an MOU with Town of Strathmore. It was brought to their council some weeks ago, and I believe they agreed to it. So it's a $10,000 agreement in exchange for certain help with events and other initiatives. They are in the planning stages for a trade show that will be May 28th and 29th in Strathmore at the Strathmore Motor Products Event Centre. And so my role with that is to we want to offer tourism experiences for people coming to the trade show. So I'll be working with our Economic Development Officer, Jamie Cramble, and Kristen Shima from the town of Strathmore, and another member to request from some of our tourism businesses in the area if they're interested in participating. So that would maybe give them some publicity in doing so. So that's my role for that. I did want to say about the APPS engagement session, which was the Government of Alberta's perspective on the proposal, I guess. Like Reeve Lake said, they didn't have a lot of answers to questions that were posed. Also, the format of the presentation was strategically interesting, I thought. They didn't do it as a Zoom meeting. It was a, what do you call it, where it's more
webinar?
like a training, like where you, sorry?
Webinar.
Webinar, that's exactly right, sorry. And so the first, like almost 40 minutes was just doing introductions of people that were online, which was surprisingly small. I think there was maybe 10 people online. And then a lot of discussion about background of where we were and where we're at. And they had intended to go section by section through it and then have questions in between. But of course they were running out of time. So then they had to like hustle through the rest of it, and there wasn't time for questions until the end. So that was all just interesting. And when you had a question, you had to type it into the chat box. So as you're doing that, of course, you're distracted from the rest of the presentation as it's going on. Like, it was just really interesting in how they formatted it in my mind. However, I asked if they could say when a go, no-go decision would be made and what further consultation could we expect, and they said they couldn't answer the go, no-go question, just that this public engagement was going to be finished this week. And they just said they would like to hear how they can further engage with municipalities and the public going forward. So not much of an answer there, I thought. I asked about funding to municipalities, and of course they didn't really, hadn't really looked at it to that level of detail yet. So couldn't say what changes we might see with this arrangement. They did, I thought that there was some hints that the federal government was considering or contemplating getting out of contract policing at the provincial level. So that might be where this is kind of coming from. It's hard to say. Hinted that other provinces are also considering and looking at a transition. Hinted that the federal funding has been decreasing over time and likely will continue to. Talked about history, that Alberta once had its own police way back. And I also asked if he thought the transition costs were reasonable, because I think that's, for me, that's a big question, whether they really have that nailed down to a level of detail that you could make a decision. He said that depending on the information provided to the consultants, he has confidence, as long as the data provided was fulsome and accurate, then he thought the estimates should be accurate. So that's kind of what I learned from those sessions. I think, I do hope that if they're going to go further, there will be more consultation. I think everybody would expect that, and I would be surprised if they didn't, but I am looking forward to hearing what the next steps are. So I think that's all that I wanted to kind of highlight. So if there's no questions, I move my report be accepted.
Any questions for Councilor Laprise? Yeah, and our session was a little bit different. I'll be brief, but the provincial police session, we didn't do introductions, and they did go through the entire presentation fairly fulsomely, and they did answer questions like as they came in. Not always, again, to the level of detail that people were hoping. They did commit to further engagement, and we specifically were advocating for public engagement as well, because of course we're there to liaison between the municipality, like this council, and GOA, but I think it is important that the public have engagement on this as well. And yeah, the transition costs and how those would be paid was definitely asked a number of times as well in the session I was in. So, interesting. Any other questions or comments? All in favor? Motion is carried. And now I will welcome Dr. Joni McNeely. If you want to just come to the microphone and state your name. And good morning.
Okay. And how do I change this thing? You can just scroll up and down with the mouse. Okay, thanks.
Perfect.
Joni McNeely.
Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you guys. Just as an overview, I'm just going to go over some of the three pillars of our society and then discuss the strategy going forward and make some comments about how Wheatland and Area Hospice Society are fitting in the bigger picture with hospice palliative care in the province. Many of us know somebody who has died, obviously, and one of the unique aspects of our society is we're all going to die, so we do have a large market that we're dealing with, and with the exception of sudden death or accident, most of those deaths will be palliative deaths, and so we do fit into most user groups in the county here. And what is palliative care? Really, it's if we're looking this way at our health choices and our aging process and disease process, palliative care is when we're switching from this view to that view. And it's what are we doing in the next weeks to days to months, dealing with this journey rather than actively carrying on with this life. So the purpose of our society is that, or what we imagine palliative care to be, is we just want to make the last days to weeks to months a little bit easier and just be a little bit better informed and help support people as issues arise so that they can be managed a little bit better. And why are we doing this? Well, we know and the Alberta government knows, and now you will know, that palliative care is a specific specialty of medicine, but really 5% of palliative care is carried out by medical personnel, and 95% of palliative care, that patient in palliative care, 95% of the time is spent either alone or with family or friends or neighbors or in their own community. So what are we doing as a community to prepare for that? And more importantly, how can we make the discussion around palliative care a little bit more informative so that it's not really a four-letter word? So, okay, here we go. I gotta switch this. We actually have 4 pillars of our hospice society, but financial responsibility isn't very sexy, so I never put that up there. So, the first pillar is people, and obviously patients and family is our #1 priority, and similarly volunteers and community donors are a priority. And what's new in this area is that the trajectory of palliative care is moving longer and longer. So instead of a 3 to 6 month trajectory, now we're looking at the diagnosis, at the time of diagnosis, that palliative care begins. So whether it's COPD or actual cancer or heart failure, that's when palliative care starts. So we're lengthening that. There's a whole lot more education, effort to go into education for the volunteers, for the family, and for the community itself. There's going to be a whole lot more effort into doing it yourself, air quotes, within the community rather than in the hospital. And as always, trying to get the best value, the best results for as little cost as, and I'll talk about that in a minute. With regards to the healthcare system and that first pillar, they're recognizing there's a huge dependency on volunteers and the community itself. And we have lost our innate ability to care in the community for the dying. It had, in the past 40 years, been moved into the hospital. So there's going to be a whole lot more retraining and education necessary, and as well liability issues, which I won't get into. For the community donors on that specific pillar, everybody wants to help. They all want to build a building. Of course, they're not realizing that there's operating costs, and that's an enduring cost. Our province is different than a lot of other provinces, where about 50% of those costs have to be covered by the community itself rather than the healthcare system. And the irony is that as more and more people are focusing on palliative care because we are all getting older, we need to move palliative care into the community as well because it is a cheaper way of dealing with healthcare costs. I've got compassionate community across all 3 of those pillars, and that's a move by a very famous Dr. Alan Keelahar out of the University of Vermont and Dr. Martin Libri from the University of Calgary, and they are the guru of promoting compassionate communities a number of places across Canada. And I'm thinking, for instance, Ottawa, Kelowna, Brampton have created charters to make themselves compassionate communities, and it's encouraging their citizens to reach in and ask how can they help. And it's not just about palliative care, it's about watching out and encouraging and sustaining others, whether it's also could be about disability care or elder care or child care, mental health, addictions, counselor care. So it encompasses all our pillars, but it also is a national-wide movement. Specifically, I'm not going to go into the programs pillar and discuss that. You guys have all likely heard about our Navigators and Bedside, Respite and No One Dies Alone program. But the idea there is that we're shifting the capacity of formal and informal supports from the medical system into the community, and we're trying to change the culture around death and dying so that it's not seen as a medical responsibility, but it's seen as a community responsibility, and as well to encourage social networks. So the third pillar, places, everybody always wants to know about when our hospice is being built, but we are offering right now hospice palliative care in all the settings in our community right now. That is in home, in the hospital, in the two long-term or seniors care facilities. Really, we are providing a hospice without walls, and that's where the physical, the emotional, psychological, spiritual needs are met. And just a reminder that 80% of people want to die in their own home, and Alberta Health Services is recognizing that, so there will be more of a shift towards that. But we do know that sometimes people aren't able to die in their home because their caregivers have burned out, or the physical environment isn't appropriate, or the caregivers aren't even capable. So that's when the wheels fall off the bus and people end up in the emergency department, and it's a very unforgettable experience. So we do need actual hospice in our facility, and we don't want people to be traveling away from our community. So when we have a hospice, or when communities have hospices, it does tend to be a focus and a hub, and allow that identity of palliative care and compassionate community to be developed. And it can't just be the palliative bed in the hospital. It has to be different, because the hospice also provides a day hospice and respite care where people can come in for the day. It's also the kitchen table, the social gathering where friends and families can gather around and be supportive and be offered support by counselors and stuff. And if we do get a hospice, we know that the patients will do better and the families will do better, and it is more financially responsible. Oh, I'm just going to move to the next one. So how do we, that's foster community there. How do we foster care in our communities? Well, AHS is recognizing, and you've all heard of age in place, they're recognizing now that die in place is the right place, is the right strategy. And it's not if that shift will be done, it's how they're going to do it. It's not if, but how. And I'm realizing I'm preaching to the choir here about community, because we all know that rural communities are light years ahead of the urban centers. But just a reminder that 95% of the time that a dying patient spends is going to be with their community and not with the medical personnel. In fact, doctors are 6th on the list of resources that families and patients seek help from. We realize that palliative care is no longer about the illness. It's about the journey, and it's about the loss and the heartaches, but it's also about the personal growth and the courage. This is palliative care. So what are we doing about it? Well, what can we do? What can you do? What policies and structures do you have in place, and what partnerships and alliances can be formed? And love it, like it or leave it, the provincial directives are changing beneath us, and we really need to maximize the positive, which is our community, and minimize the negative, which is lack of dollars for beds. And that's going to take some leadership and facilitation. So what are we doing? Good or bad, hospice palliative care is coming to a town near you. And it's interesting, you know, that the government of Alberta is asking us to get there, and I think we are already there. We have a great society and we have a great community that has really bought into this. And where we're moving in the future, optimizing ourselves, is what are our points of pain and what are our points of gain. And in our little neck of the woods, what are we doing? Our hospice society really is the little engine that could, and if we're always going back to those 3 pillars of people, places, and programs, and how can we create and engage and support. The provincial medical planners have been given $20 million over the last 2 years to deal with that. $9 million was given out last year, and $11 million is just around the corner. And really, what are they doing with that money is they're providing more education to medical providers, to the nursing staff and doctors. Never was there palliative care in our curriculum going through medical school, so that all has to be I know that all has to be redesigned. So specific curriculum lessons, they're recognizing that 95% of this needs to be supported, so there's going to be more education for volunteers, for community, a lot of it electronically, and lots more programming support for small hospice societies like us. What can we do in the meantime? Well, we're hoping to keep on going. We're hoping to have your support to recognize that we are an integral part of the community, and we are an integral part of shaping the tone and future of our community on how we care for ourselves. And we recognize that death and dying is just one phase of our life, but every phase of our life needs to be planned for, so this does too. Thanks for letting me talk with you guys, and a reminder, there is a hike for hospice and farming for hospice, which I know you guys always support, and mention that to your residents, and thank you. Remember, one day you will all be in my spot. So, any questions?
Thank you, Dr. McNeely. Any questions? Councillor Larson and then Councillor Custer.
Thanks for your presentation. Just a question. This is a great thing. I know what I went through in 2018 with my father when I took him out of the hospital, and the limited amount of funding that was available for me to allow him to die in his home. I'm not sure what's changed in the 4 years since then, but my question would be to you is, how can we support these programs to switch the model? Because back then the funding for him to stay in the hospital, for example, was not transferable to take him home. So, you know, you have an option to leave him in the hospital or take him home. Fortunately for us, I had enough money, we could do it out of pocket, but not everybody can do that. So what can we do to support this and to change the AHS ship so that they'll put the funding there for your initiative and for the people that want to do this but can't necessarily afford to do it on their own?
Well, what you can do is spread the message that most of the care will be in the community, and apply pressure to the provincial government to release those funds for further care. So at the moment, home care allows for 46 hours a week. So you divide that by 7 days, 24 hours a day. That is not a lot of hours per week for home care. At end of life, in the last 2 weeks, there's an additional $10,000, which basically allows for 4 hours a day extra for those 2 weeks. In the past, actually, as a result of our advocating, that's the reason that $10,000 came up. But in the past, you can imagine yourself as a capable person trying to hire, find, screen, schedule a caregiver for that. So our navigator really has a role with that to support the family. We need more money.
Let me just add to that, because that's a great point. Because when I was caring for my father, it was not 46 hours a week. It was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from the time he was diagnosed terminal till 4 months later when he passed.
It's heartbreaking.
That was a significant effort. I'm fortunate I had a bunch of good friends and stuff, but without that, I mean, not everybody has that. So this is why I'm saying this is important, but you know, what you need from us to help is, I think, you know, I like your idea, but it seems to me there might be some more concrete lobbying we can do to the government to say, smarten up.
Yeah.
Sorry for the wrong words, but
yes,
that's the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're a capable caregiver. Imagine if your dad didn't have you, if there wasn't somebody there for that. And that's one of the reasons we do need a hospice. For those, you know, it's a 3 to 6 bed hospice. We're saying 3 beds now. That's based on 7.7 beds per 100,000, which is the population now, growth to 6 beds. But in a lot of cases, there isn't those caregivers available. Or the house isn't, you know, the bathroom's upstairs, or there's specific needs. So we do need to have that. And, you know, that 50% of funding for the operating costs, we're looking at operating costs of about $600,000 per year to operate that hospice facility. Imagine where that money needs to come from.
Hi, Tony. You mentioned the 5% at home, and they get attributed a certain amount of home care. But when you live in rural Alberta, that home care is eaten up in travel.
Yes.
Are you advocating, or do you see any? I keep asking questions, but
yes,
we're looking at it, but I never hear anything.
So we're advocating for more hours, right? 46 isn't enough. We're advocating for more training of our volunteers, because Nurse Next Door or those nursing agencies that come from Calgary, that eats up a lot of travel time if you're leaving, coming and going to Hazard. As well, if the weather's bad, that Nurse Next Door from driving from Calgary is going to bail so that the wheels fall off the bus then. Really, it's going to be, for our specific situation, it's going to be training volunteers to be coming into the home to help with that, and recognizing that a lot of our volunteers, our bedside respite volunteers, are actually retired or currently active, LPNs and HCAs. We've developed a policy so that if the wheels do fall off the bus and it looks like there's going to be a disaster that against the family's wishes or the patient's wishes, that they'll have to move out of the community, whether into the hospital or into another hospice, that our volunteers are now being paid out of that money. So we're just trying to reinvent the wheel to keep people in their place of choice. And we're actually being recognized as being innovative by Alberta Health for the work that we're doing with all this policy development and the volunteer development. I can't really say much more about that, but it's coming down the pipes.
And also, too, it makes a point for rural Alberta get access to more hospice beds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hospice in rural Alberta is so important because the family and the family and the friends and the community is the patient. So if you leave your community, if you go to Okotoks or access a hospice in Calgary, then that patient is not being cared for because it's the community that needs the palliative care, that needs to be a part of that. And that's very important. Yes, we need a rural hospice. Yes, we need your support for helping us with the operating costs of that. And that's coming down the pipes.
I might just add that we're starting phase of doing I think they call it a pro forma, getting all the numbers done, so they might be contacting you and
Okay.
asking.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Trying to put the whole package together.
Yes, and we've looked at a lot of those operating costs. We've been to Okotoks Hospice, Red Deer Hospice, and working with Alberta Health. Shelley Harriman has done a great deal of work with a number of different models to lower, to get the most value for our money, to get that, and we certainly appreciate the cooperation of the Wheatland Housing Management Body to share some of those operating costs so we can minimize the impact that we have. So, thanks, you guys. I really appreciate it. I just flew in from Vancouver last night and literally flew in because of the wind. And then spent an hour and a half around the baggage carousel, so I'm a little bit
Well, we're grateful that you took your time to share this with us today. It is really important for us to understand what hospice does in our community, and I want to thank you and your board and all of the volunteers that do this precious, critical, beautiful work in our community, and we know how important it is, and just the realities that we're facing, and I think it is important that we're all aware of this and do everything that we can to support you and the Hospice Society. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, and there will be something coming soon from up top, so you guys will need to be aware of that. So, okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. You guys want to do a council team for Hike for Hospice? I think we should do a team.
When is it?
We can talk about it at lunch. I'll get you the date towards the end of May, I think. Perhaps a motion to accept Dr. McNeely's presentation as information.
Also moved.
Councillor Bigger has moved. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. And then I realized we should probably get a motion to accept the addendum to Councillor Laprice's report. We'll do the first one, the Alberta Police transition study slides first. Just a motion to accept as information. No, that's okay.
I'll move to accept the APPS report as information.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We'll move to 3.32. Councillor Laprice requested to add the nuisance and unsightly property bylaw and some Division 1 resident complaints to the agenda.
So I just wanted to maybe have a discussion here in council about our bylaw. I'm getting reports from people in Cluny that there are still some unsightly properties in that hamlet that have been discussed for years, basically. It's just never, I think our bylaw officers go out and I'm not sure how it, I know that there's a process and that our bylaw covers that, but it just feels like it's not getting resolved to the level that our county residents are content with. And so I'm just not sure if there's something more we could do, or if there's some way to maybe track progress in this area. I'm not sure, but I just wanted to raise it and see if there's any ideas around the table about how we can maybe make this better for people.
Does the administration have any comments you'd like to start with? Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and through the chair to Councilor McBride. So there is a process that it goes through. So if I may, I'll explain the process we go through when we get a complaint with regards to a nuisance property. So when the call comes in, it's assigned to an officer right away. That officer will then go out and inspect the property. There's two ways we can inspect the property. The easy way is to do from off property. So legally, we can stand anywhere off of someone's property and inspect. We cannot enter their property to conduct an inspection at first. If we can see what we need to, then we can take action on that based on the criteria. So there is a criteria in the bylaw that spells out what we would look for to whether we determine the property a nuisance or an unsightly property, okay? And it's very broad, and there is a purpose behind that, is because some people have different standards in the way they want to live. So we have to keep it very broad, and we can't make it so specific. I know some municipalities will say you can't have your grass more than 10 centimeters high and stuff like that. It's extremely difficult to enforce, and it's, in some cases, can be quite unrealistic. So if we can't get the inspection done from off the property, then what we'll do is we will do up a notice of entry under the Municipal Government Act and deliver it, either post it on the door, or then we will, or mail it to the person if we cannot get access to them. And that spells out a date and time that we will attend the property and conduct the inspection. So if when we get there, the property owner says, no, you're not coming on, then we have to leave and go to Queen's Bench Court to get an injunction. And that can take, obviously, several weeks to months to get an injunction. If they do let us on, then we do the inspection, cataloging absolutely everything that needs to be removed from the property or what can bring the property back into compliance. And that's where is most time consuming. Well, it's relatively time consuming because, of course, it has to be specific. You can't just generally say clean up garbage in this point or this point. It has to be specific what you want removed. Because if the time comes that we have to do a cleanup, we actually have to keep their property for up to 90 days so they can reclaim it once we take it. So at that point, after the inspection is done, going back there, the officer, if we have cooperation from the resident or the owner, we want to work with people as much as we can. The whole idea is voluntary compliance. We don't want to start going around and start issuing orders on everybody. If we can get voluntary compliance, that is our first step. So normally what we'll do is, if we find that there can be some voluntary compliance, or we've had good success with the individual who owns a property or maintains that property, we'll do a verbal agreement with them where we'll say, well, you work with us, we'll work with you. With the caveat that the minute you stop working with us, we stop working with you, and then we proceed to our next steps, which are a remedial order. So the remedial order is sorry, I'll step back. So there's two options that we can do after that. We can either issue a warning letter to somebody just saying, we've gotten a concern about your property. Can you please do something about it by such and such a date? If it's done, we're done. If it's not done, then we can come back and issue the remedial order. The bylaw does give us the permission to go directly to the remedial order, though. We don't have to go through the warning letter first. And in a majority of properties, we go directly to the remedial order because we are cognizant enough and have been doing this long enough to know that people don't tend to react to written warnings very well. So we'll issue the remedial order with a timeline to have a property remedied. And usually it's 3 weeks. And I say 3 weeks, and it can vary and it holds with me for things. We have to give 7 days for mailing under the Interpretation Act. After 7 days, an order is considered mailed and delivered if we've not gotten heard anything back. So we have to give that, and then we usually give 2 weeks post that to conduct the cleanup. Now, again, due to wanting to work with people and not wanting to get into it, the due date means nothing if they contact us. So if they contact us and we can come up with something, the due date on the remedial no longer will apply. Unless, of course, it's argumentative or so on and so forth. There's always, every situation can bring a different method of enforcement and level of enforcement. So once the remedial order is done, and if there's been compliance, file's concluded. And again, it's just to the minimum standard. If there's no compliance, then depending on what it is, if it's just tall grass or weeds, we will hire a contractor and do another notice of entry, and then we will then go on the property and remedy the property. The landscaping company then invoices us, and then we invoice them, and if they don't pay, it goes on their taxes. And then that's theoretically should solve the problem for now. The other cleanups, large-scale property cleanups and such, are a little bit more complicated than that in the fact that when you're removing property, we have to, again, catalog everything that's been removed, where it's been, and then where it goes on and where it goes, because we will have to store that stuff for, I believe it's minimum 30 days, but a maximum of 90 days. And then we can disperse it. We can either sell it or we can throw it out if it's garbage. And then, of course, the costs go back to the resident or the property owner. So, of course, then if they don't do it, or we get told again when we go to clean it up, no, then we have to go to court and get an injunction, which can take months, depending on how backed up the courts are. Most of our properties are weeds and tall grass. That's 4 years ago, our department decided to take a proactive approach in the hamlets with vacant lots and lots that we know aren't being tendered to. So essentially in May, we'll go around the properties that we know haven't been done in the past. We go and inspect them, take photos, and a remedial order goes out. The timeline, of course, then goes this and that, but with mailing out orders, respecting, getting all the paperwork done, mailing out orders, waiting for them to expire, or contact, then finding a contractor, because of course summertime's busy for landscaping companies and so on and so forth, so we have to find somebody, and then get on their schedule, then get the notices of entry out. Now if we have to mail them, again, of course we have to give a few days to get mailing out. Then we can go remedy the property. So this process can take 2 to 3 months, which is why in the hamlets we tend to do it once per season. And we try, usually the grass gets cut in August, so then it's done and then it'll start to go dormant, then we don't have to worry about it again. And any of those other complaints, we deal with them as best we can. Like I say, 90% of the time is voluntary compliance. In my time here, I think we've only actually had to execute for large-scale cleanups, maybe 4 or 5 total. So they are very time-consuming. I can tell you there's 2 I'm dealing with that we've dealt with that are, one I've been dealing with for 7 years. Another one we've dealt with for about 4 or 5 years. So just because they may not see anything happening doesn't mean there isn't things going on behind the scenes. So there is, it is a long process, and of course we're limited in staff as well. So of course we have to make sure that we can deal with all that stuff as well as all the other stuff we have to deal with as well. So and I do have. I'll take any questions if anybody has any questions.
Thank you very much for all the information. I do appreciate it. I do appreciate all the work that you guys do. I know that there are ones that we do see that improvements are made and people kind of, yep, I get it. That's awesome. I do have a couple questions. So when you inspect a property, you take pictures, I assume, and then you can see before and after, and then you can sort of see what level of compliance. I assume most times people will clean up half or a part of what is expected, or how do you find that works? It
depends on the circumstances.
Right.
Most will, in a lot of them, it's just cutting the grass, or pulling some weeds and cleaning up a few odds and ends in the backyard. And so we do get relatively good compliance on those. The large scale ones, again, can be a little bit more tricky because, of course, it goes back to the one person's trash is another person's treasure. So therefore, we also have to worry about that aspect of it because we start taking things and so on and so forth. We have to be very careful where we take it, what we take it, and so on and so forth.
Oh, for sure. I appreciate that, yeah. Okay. Can you tell me what the cost is to a homeowner if we cut their grass?
I believe it's about $500.
Oh, okay.
So it's definitely not cheap because, of course, by the time we get the company out there and they bill us for their time, it's usually around $500.
To me, that seems like a bargain, to be honest. I mean, if you don't live in a house and you pay $500 a year to get it cut, it's not bad. If you were maintaining it yourself, you'd cut the grass many times more than that, obviously. And if you were hiring a company to do it for you, I think it'd be much more than that. But that's maybe a discussion for another day. And I guess then the other question or comment maybe is, so you're aware of the properties that are just in constant non-compliance. Is there any way of going out sooner and maybe not just in the summertime? And my concern is that we have such a short summer that by going out in May, I realize that's when the grass has gotten to a point where it's and you say 90% are tall grass and weeds, but I just wonder if we could go more regularly and earlier in the year, and just so that when the summer months come and we want to be outside, that maybe they could be already being addressed at that point. I don't know if that's...
Well, and through the chair, we already know which properties aren't going to be done, but we have to give the grass time to grow.
Yeah.
Legally, we can't go in and tell them to do something before it's become illegal or become an offense. Because I've had that question raised before, like, why don't you just do? We have to actually wait for an offense to occur before we can take enforcement action on it.
But when it's not the grass, if it's like unsightly because of junk that's accumulated.
Well, those are dealt with all year.
Okay.
We don't just do those in the summer. So,
okay.
Sorry if I wasn't clear on that.
Okay.
Unsightly property complaints come in year round.
Okay.
And we deal with them year round. And some are easily dealt with during the winter months and with snow on the ground. Some are a little more difficult to deal with snow on the ground because you can't see what's all in there. Yep. So for inspection purposes, they may have to be done in the spring.
Great. One last thing I just wanted to ask about, and that is, I didn't see in our bylaw about like fences that are falling down in a hamlet. Like, it's not really specified if there's a way of...
It would fall under the nuisance, depending, of course, the scope thereof. Like, it would, we'd have to look at it as a nuisance. Fences aren't governed under the land use bylaw. We don't regulate fences, so it's another one of those gray areas. Fences tend to also be sometimes shared ownership, so on and so forth. So determining all that kind of stuff. But yeah, if a fence is dilapidated and it looks bad and so on and so forth, falling down, we definitely will look into it.
Okay. Well, thank you. I do appreciate the information. I can certainly talk to residents about the process and what constraints we have, obviously, in terms of timing and following due diligence and making sure that we're doing the best we can to get things done as quickly as we can, given the constraints of a week in the mail and 2 weeks. And injunctions and that kind of thing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I can speak to it too because I've had a few in my division. It takes forever. We have to be a higher standard as a municipality, and then even all the hoops that we jump through, they can go to court, and the judge can deem that we are not fair, and it could even prolong it even more. I've seen that, and it's extremely frustrating. I've had ones that have been cleaned up and then they add more again.
Yeah, I imagine that would happen.
The cycle resets when you get to a certain point,
yeah,
and then it starts all over again. And it's time consuming, it's expensive, and it's not. Definitely would be easier if the MGA let us do some different things, but we're bound by that, right? So.
I had another thought, just in terms of feedback. So I'm just curious how that works. If a resident complains about somebody, how do you feedback to them, or do they just witness that it's being done? Or what kind of information can you provide somebody who's complaining?
Well, again, we have to be very careful what information we divulge. It's a comment we get with a lot of things. We do our best not to divulge complainants when people call in. 9 times out of 10, though, when we show up, they already know who's called. And that can cause friction between neighbors. We always try, in a lot of cases, to have neighbors talk it out first, rather than having us come in first instance, depending on the scenario. We won't just use nuisance properties, but any of the bylaws that we deal with or any laws we deal with, we always try to see can you work it out amongst yourselves first, because if we show up first, it can make things worse. And I've seen scenarios in my career where us showing up first has made things worse, and the person says, why didn't they just talk to me? Why do they have to call you guys? And I just have to say, I don't know. And then it also becomes problematic because once we get to a point, if we get to court processes and stuff like that, we are handcuffed. We cannot tell complainants anything. We can't provide them any information. The defense gets everything. We have to provide a defense lawyer, if we're issuing a violation. We have to provide them with copies of our tickets, copies of our notes, copies of all our photos, copies of everything. They get all that. The complainants or the victims get nothing. And it's a problem with our system, the way it is set up. What I've told people in the past is show up in court on the court date. I'll give you the court date, go up and show up. Because once it goes on, the charge has been laid, it's on the public record, it goes on the docket, you can show up in court any day and find out certain names and so on and so forth.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Sorry I had to leave for a bit there. But I can remember back a few years when we developed this bylaw, and I just want to inform council here of the numerous amendments that were brought in, namely by you trying to perfect the bylaw and make it. And I just want to commend you on your dedication to this bylaw. You started it, but you honed it to what it is today. And I'm sure if you need any more help, you would think of a way to ask us for it. So thanks for that.
Through the chair, I appreciate that. And yes, we're always open to suggestions. The bylaw can be revised at any time. That's the beauty of it. It's not written in stone. If we can find something that makes it work a little bit better, I'm always open to it.
Building on Councillor Kester's comment, are there any revisions that you would recommend at this point, or is it serving well for your purpose?
Sorry, ma'am, through the chair. Right now it is serving our purpose. We review it all the time. We look at it. A lot of the stuff that comes out of it is just our internal processes and how we do it. We're always trying to refine ways and make things easier. And for example, I'll give you a real world example. Having printers in our vehicles makes life a lot easier. The 2 officers were out doing a property inspection the other day. They could not get on the property because, of course, the way this property was set up, they couldn't access it and see what they needed to see. So they went back into the truck, printed out a notice of entry and slammed it on the door right away, and the resident called us within half an hour. So technology comes along that processes. We're always working on processes and the use of technology to make things a little bit better and easier for us.
In that regard, I've had people ask about if you can't have access to a property, what about drones? Do they own the airspace above their property? I know it's...
Through the chair, no, you do not own the airspace above your property. We as a municipality or whatnot want to be very careful, though. We don't want to. We can legally use a drone. We can send it up and go around the property. We've actually done that for a file we assisted with development for on a file they had with a stop order. So we actually had a person take a drone out and inspect the property from above, and it was really, really good. We actually have purchased a drone. We have a trained pilot. We're just getting it set up so we can use it for some of these things as well. Make it a little easier for us as well.
Any other questions? Does council see anything in the bylaw that we feel we could improve or that would make it more effective.
Got a question for administration. We have designated use, like probably not the right terminology. We definitely don't have anything in our land use bylaw that says you can have an auto wreckers, and yet we have issues with auto wreckers. Like, how do you address that? And you know, it's is there some way that we can penalize somebody for making that stretch, right? Like, I can say that I have 3 vehicles that I'm parting out on my property for my personal use, but when that turns into a 400, there's no longer any sort of personal use kind of thing in there. So me being at setting on as an enforcement, yourself on my good graces to get rid of 397 of those vehicles again, I can see that can be very expensive. It should not fall on our shoulders to do that, right? Because it's all something they did. So.
And through the chair. So the land use bylaw, of course, has, and forgive me, I'm not 100% up on the land use bylaw. I know little bits here and there, but certain businesses like that can apply in heavy industrial areas for a development permit for such like that. So, but for enforcement wise, and use a record for an example, if a stop order was issued and never came down to having to actually remediate, where do you take them? Because they're junkyards, we'd have to take them to another junkyard, right? Or hire a crusher to come in and do it, and so on and so forth. But you are correct through the chair. It is a very expensive process to have to go through, and I know that our planning and development people are on top of them, and they will. When they get calls and concerns about these things, they do act on them through their processes that they have to do, and we assist them with those processes as well.
We'll follow up on that, and this will be to administration then. If we were to say, okay, we're going to bring a crusher in, we've had enough of this because you're contravening the law, I don't think there's any justification for that. Does that expense, expense go onto the tax roll then? So depending on the particular property, it may or may not be a
yes, that's correct.
Alternative.
And just to supplement Chris's comments, I think it's important to note the nuisance and the land use, they do speak together. So first of all, I'd encourage every councillor, if you do have properties, please get in touch and we will address it and get back as expeditiously as possible with respect to actions taken, and we continuously do that. Chris highlighted that auto wreckers are intensive industrial in nature. So oftentimes when we receive a concern, a peace officer goes out, inspects, kind of gets an idea of how many, with this particular use as an example, how many autos or whatever the uses are, where it's delineated from maybe a shop to a wrecker, and what the predominant land use is of that parcel. Once it's determined that, for instance, the use has grown to a use that just it contravenes the land use bylaw, then we'll send a letter of inquiry, and we'll often go out, a peace officer will go out and we'll put a letter of inquiry through the hand snail mail process, or if we have contact, we'll send it digitally as well, and we'll give some time for a response as to what's going on, and then we proceed with the steps as Chris outlined, similar steps. So we'll go down the line of that letter of inquiry, we'll try to work with the operator to then spell out some options, fix it to an appropriate use because it's non-conforming, because it's expanded under a bylaw, for instance, that has changed, or we will give you a set amount of time to work with that, or you can apply for an amendment. Right, so you can go through that process, and we'll walk them through the steps of the planning process, and we'll often highlight, adjacent issues. So there's obviously been concerns. So the chances of that working in terms of modifying the bylaw, well, you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z to get there. in order to continue your operation, and that might impact their business operation to an extent where they're going to have to modify it and all of that. So there's all of those layers when it gets to a land use issue, and that's how we address it. So we continuously work hand in hand in terms of enforcement from a development perspective and a property standards perspective, or a nuisance and unsightly bylaw enforcement perspective. Yeah. So please, again, just to reiterate, it's important that please send us issues that you see, not just in May, but we've been working with councillors in the east and the west and the north and the south. So it's good to get those properties highlighted to us so that we know. And like Chris said, there is history to some of them we're aware of. There's different layers. Maybe the RCMP is working on something. Maybe it's a legacy file and the rest, but it's important to please send us anything that you see. Thanks.
And just to supplement Matt and Chris's comments as well, there's a very specific section under the MGA that allows a municipality to add amounts to a tax roll, and that's ultimately how we would collect it. So that would be the most common occurrence for that is grass cutting. Section 553 sub 1 sub C is the act says unpaid expenses and costs referred to in section 549 sub 3 if the parcel's owner contravened an enactment or a bylaw and contravention occurred in all or parts of the parcel. And just for reference for council, 549 is the title of 549 is municipal remedying contraventions. So that would be like a contravention of the nuisance bylaw. And that's ultimately how we recover the money.
And just for clarity on that, to remedy though, it would either need to be voluntary or you would need a court injunction, like if the landowner does not voluntarily permit access.
Yes, so there is two streams. On those court injunctions, it can be either two separate streams. So it can be the court orders a party to remedy a property, or a municipality can take the action that the municipality requests the court that the municipality goes and remedies the property. So there are two separate streams. The most ideal property in an extreme case is for the county would be we go to court and make them do it. Worst case scenario is we go to court that requests that we do it. Then ultimately we are able to add that expense to the tax roll of that property, assuming that courts and higher levels of court deem that order valid.
And I think that's often where we could have, like, say we were trying to enforce a lot of these and there was no voluntary compliance, that's where capacity and cost becomes an issue. Because if we have to go through court for that injunction, like on significant files, like administration has done that, but if we were doing it for every, like that's where the challenge is. So it's definitely difficult because it's so subjective, right? Some people think that their yard is perfectly fine the way it is, but it's, different people have different standards, but yeah, it's very challenging.
Further to your question about the actual bylaw and if there's any potential adjustments or whatever to be made, I'm curious if anybody else feels like 2 unregistered vehicles in a hamlet property is excessive. So you could have 2 unregistered vehicles plus your vehicle and your wife's vehicle. You could have a lot of vehicles in one little property, I'm thinking. So I don't know. To me, that seems excessive, but I don't know if we've even had very many issues around that particular.
And we've had variation on that because like originally that was included in the bylaw, then it was removed from the bylaw for some time, and then we did integrate it back into the bylaw in another amendment because there were some issues.
We took the whole thing out and then put it back in?
Yeah, there was no limit on vehicles, and then with our previous council there was a discussion around unlicensed vehicles. We did settle on the 2 within hamlets just because obviously in agricultural operations or that type of thing, at times you will have more unlicensed vehicles. But in the hamlets we did leave it at 2. It was sort of a concession, if you will, was my recollection.
If I may, through the chair, the section right below it also gives us discretion. if you have a 2-acre lot and you have more than 2 and it doesn't look terrible, they're well-kept vehicles, so on and so forth, is different than having pieces of vehicles parked all over the place. So although the bylaw is all-encompassing, every scenario is different, and we have to treat them all subjectively and different.
Right. And you're right, there's that where you have discretion based on space availability and the upkeep of it. Well, I guess I'm content with that.
The big thing that I find is just because our bylaws are primarily complaint-based, and when I first got on council, that was hard for me to wrap my head around for sure. I think some other councillors as well. But we do not have capacity to consistently enforce all of our bylaws throughout the entire county. So then I think for sort of fairness, or like from a justice perspective, that's why it's complaint-based, because then, you know, you're not discriminating in where you apply it or like that type of thing. It's based on sort of where the issues are. But the sort of with that is the requirement for residents to actually report concerns that they have. And I do appreciate that isn't like freely shared. Obviously, if it's required in court or that type of thing, it will be disclosed who made the complaint, but there is some discretion where it's possible to not share that. So, and that's been helpful for my ratepayers that have had to do complaints. So
just following on that, I just if you have a property that you look at and they remediate it, and then do you go back after that just to ensure that it hasn't fallen back in, or do you wait for another complaint to come in?
It depends on the scenario.
Okay.
Through the chair, because we are familiar with them, we'll usually take a second glance at them when we're traveling through, because we are aware. I can speak to a couple spots where I see myself where it's like, okay, this guy's getting a little bit out of control again, let's keep an eye on him. Yeah. And I remind the other officers when they're traveling through these areas, oh, so-and-so's place is looking to be a little bit crazy again, so let's just keep an eye on it and maybe nip it in the butt before we have to get back on it hard.
Awesome. Okay.
And if I just may, through the chair, when we started doing the proactiveness with the grass and weeds and stuff like that, our file count and actual remedies have decreased by about 20% each year since. So by us just going ahead and doing it, I mean, by letter of the bylaw is supposed to be a complaint. However, we are being proactive rather than having people call with 25 or 30 different complaints. I can speak to a couple of hamlets where 3 years ago we may have had 20 or 30 lots that we were going through, and last year there might have been 10. So by doing that, we have worked with voluntary compliance. People don't want to pay that extra bill. They'll work with us. We'll give them a bit more time. We do have a limit. Like we're nice, but we're nice to a point, you know, and we've had scenarios where a person keeps coming and said, well, just give me another day. Just give me another day. Sorry, we can't. We have our jobs to do. And unfortunately, we have given you as much time as we can. You have done nothing, or you have done the bare minimum. We have to remedy this situation, and we're going to do it. And if you get it done before tomorrow morning, then we'll send our crew away. But if you don't, it's going to be cut.
Right. Very good.
Any other questions regarding the bylaw and its implementation? Perhaps just a motion to accept for information, and thank you for sharing the process and how it all works.
I really do appreciate it, Chris. Thank you very much. So I do move to accept Officer Perman's report as presented, or for information. Yeah.
Questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Just look to administration if lunch is here.
Yes, lunch is here.
Okay. Perhaps we will break until, let's go 45 minutes. We'll come back at 12:50.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody.